So my topic for today is actually about developing the next generation CHROs. I think it's quite apt since majority, from at least the roster that I saw, majority of the attendance today is practically HR, varying levels of HR practitioners, and I know we also have some line leaders and some senior executives in the room. But when Richard asked me to speak, I thought maybe I'll just spend a couple of slides, take a few minutes of your time to talk about Aon a little bit and why the shift and how appropriate it is to go from BPO to a non-BPO, apart from the fact that after 14 years, I finally saw the light, literally and figuratively, having worked the night shift. So the work that I do at Aon as a strategic accounts lead is essentially providing advisory and consultative services to different clientele, whether it be around risk, talent, and health. Around risk, so we provide advisory services on property and casualty, insurance and risk mitigation. So some examples of which might be security incident reports. Of late, we have becoming more popular kidnap, ransom, and extortion. And another example that I can cite would be around cyber. So protecting your data and all that is becoming more and more in demand and more important as organizations pursue success in their respective fields. We also provide capabilities around talent. So around talent space, we provide consulting services on employee engagement. And as Richard had mentioned, I came from an organization that believed in very high employee engagement. In fact, about the time that I left them, we were running at 84%. And I just found out most recently they were on an all-time high 88% score engagement using the Aon engagement survey tool. Around consulting services on talent, we also provide advisory services on leadership, rewards, performance, and we have different kinds of products around assessments which can be used either for talent acquisition or can be used for succession planning, depending on your needs. And then finally, in terms of health solutions, whether it be benefits design, total reward strategy, a benefits audit, for example, looking at the minimum provision as opposed to what you have as far as your benefits, allowances are concerned. These are some of the things we do alongside with providing brokerage services for your health or HMO, group life, group accident insurance. We advocate for you as a client. So a lot of the things that we do in terms of advisory services around these three different pillars are essentially backed by data and analytics. We're very proud of our proprietary tools around technology and data analytics because we believe a lot of decisions and advising that we do for clients are really backed by data that we have in our system. In the Philippines, we have a presence in 3 different locations. So we're in Makati, which is our largest office. We also have locations in Cebu and Davao. Not to say that our clients are just limited to those geographies in the Philippines, but we have clients all the way north and all the way south. We also leverage resources and colleagues that are part of the region in Asia. So we have over 30 offices in Asia Pacific with 3,500 employees, and globally we have a presence in 500 different offices around the world with 50,000 strong. I'm very proud to say that Aon, for the second year in a row, has been awarded as the #1 global professional firm around strategic risk management. So when Richard and Rebecca asked me to speak today around the topic of think big, be big, 2 things that resonated well with me were around ASEAN. So why ASEAN? Why the Asean region? Primarily because a lot of CHROs, especially today, if you looked at LinkedIn, if you pay attention to job boards, there's a lot of mobility happening in various industries around Asia Pacific with CHROs moving around the region. And so for me, think big means ASEAN, not necessarily just Philippines. And think big to me also means go beyond the typical HR role and step up to the plate of being CHRO. So for purposes of today's talk, the CHRO for me is essentially your very most senior head of HR in the country or in the region. So I'll talk about the people landscape in the Asean region, and then we'll talk about CHROs today, some key success factors and capabilities that one needs to do to perform well at that level, and then finally, some key takeaways for you guys. So let's take a look at the Asean region. Aon has a study on best employers. Awarding is incidental to us. It's more of a study because we believe in helping clients take the journey to become a best employer and to create their own competitive advantage. So our best employer program is actually anchored on 4 pillars: employee engagement, effective leadership strategies and the leadership team, a compelling employer brand, and lastly, a high-performance culture. To arrive at data for these 4 different pillars, it actually includes 3 different steps or 3 different tiers of data gathering. So one is the voice of the employee, which is your employee engagement study. And then second is the voice of HR, which is essentially a people practices survey or assessment. And then third is the voice of the CEO, where we take a look at gap analysis between what employees had said, what HR said, and what the CEO views. So part of that study included an in-depth interview with a variety of CEOs coming from different industries. And when we ask CEOs where they are from a spectrum of their organization being in infancy stage versus being in the fast growth stage, 80% of the CEOs that we spoke to actually consider themselves to be fast or steady growth mode. And when we asked them further about people issues that they're faced with today, they said that pretty much in the Asean region, it's similar kinds of issues that we hear about in the Philippines. So it pertains to talent availability and attraction, engagement and retention, compatibility in terms of what the organization needs, how fast mid-level managers can step up, and the leadership pipeline that they have in the organization. And finally, compression in terms of margins because of rising salaries and because of cost of attrition. So a lot of these prevailing issues are not just, again, in the ASEAN region, but they're actually present as well in the Philippines. So we created, I'm a very visual person, so I kind of have to see it in this kind of fashion. And maybe some of you can relate better. So when we ask the CEOs to evaluate the likelihood of these issues happening in their organizations, we also ask them the degree of impact of each of the issues. We get this kind of a 2x2. So a lot of the issues that you see on the top right-hand quadrant are essentially the same as what I had mentioned earlier. However, what's quite alarming is the high cost of healthcare that is becoming more and more apparent. And I think it is there, it's just that the problem is I think people aren't talking about it much and talking about it often. I know my colleague earlier spoke about it, Eric this morning spoke about it in terms of top illnesses and whatnot. And those top illnesses are affecting the younger population, not just the older generation. And it's happening across all industries, not just in the BPO space, but perhaps more prevalent in the BPO space. So I'll come back to this slide later on because it is relevant in your role as a CHRO. But from the study that we did in the Best Employer Program, 50% of the CEOs that we spoke to had mentioned that these issues are essentially the issues that keep them awake at night. And if you see, again, rising healthcare cost is one of those that's on the list. So what does this mean for CHROs? all these issues pertaining to talent management, pertaining to human capital, there's a need, as what Patrick had mentioned earlier, to transform. And a lot of these issues are essentially reshaping the role of CHROs. Gone are the days when your CHROs are just the administrative experts and just the transactional HR experts. Today, more and more is required of CHROs to be more strategic and to have greater ownership over the success of the business. So these factors are what we considered in our study to be factors that are reshaping the CHRO's role today. So digitalization is obviously one of them. We've all heard about it for the past few years. AI, disruption around technology will be quicker and faster than ever before. Your employee population is demanding attention. And not just attention, but they want customization in terms of services. They want speed and agility in terms of resolution of their issues. And they want innovation in terms of what you do for them as an HR team. Non-traditional competition for talent will continue to prevail in and outside of the BPO industry. It's obviously clear that it is prevalent in the BPO industry, but even more so even outside, because the trend now is to hire from outside the industry and bring in new blood into the BPO space. So what does that mean for those of you in pharma, in manufacturing, in other services industries? These are threats to you. And the previously what you might have seen as non-competition is now becoming competition. So we've got to rethink the way we retain, and again, also rethink the way we attract and engage our talent. Multi-generation workforce. There's a trend across all industries where obviously it's about managing multi-generation. Gone are the days when we only talk about millennials, right? If we're still talking about millennials today, we're kind of falling behind, because today we've got to rethink the multi-generation workforce that we need to manage and cater to. And finally, I think this is my favorite piece, because for me, I took this journey. C-suites, your CEOs, your CFOs, members of your board, members of your regional and global offices are demanding more and more of the HR team to step up, particularly those in senior HR positions. We interviewed 67 CHROs in Asia as part of our study, And 67 of these CHROs in Asia Pacific 50% of them belong to global organizations, and quite large organizations, and cumulatively, they have over 1,500 years of experience. So if you do the math and divide, that's about roughly 22 years experience per CHRO. So we spoke to them and ask them about their role in the organization relative to the people issues I spoke about earlier. And what we found is that CHROs view themselves as a critical stakeholder in driving business success and business performance through its human capital strategies. And how do they essentially do that? Number one, it's board presence. So we talk about seat at the table, making sure HR has a seat at the table, and I'm sure many of you do, through your ManCom, your ELT, your SLT, your Execom, whichever way you call it. But that's not enough. Today, a seat at the table means having a presence at the board, whether it's to come in and present one agenda item or to actually be a board member. But it is becoming more and more critical for HR, for a CHRO to be part of that board. Being confident and an advisor to the CEO is very important. And it's not about advising on gut feel or just your perspective, just your opinion, but it's actually coupling that with insights and decisions based on critical thinking and based on data and analytics. And finally, it is expected of the CHRO to drive business success through human capital strategies. And these are essentially the 4 things that we have found to be expectations by your CEOs for a CHRO to succeed. One of the other things that we asked both the CEOs and the CHROs would be, what are some of the emerging roles that they find as the years go on, as they step up to the plate of being CHROs, what are some emerging roles that they are finding would be critical for their success? So we spoke about digital transformation, not just being able to adapt, but being the change champion to transform HR and enable HR transformation. Second and third are kind of related to each other. The CHRO needs to be the architect of cultural change and be able to dissect the organization and define the kind of culture that they want to have in order to succeed. If you take that together with capability mapping and being able to look at the capabilities of the organization today, where the gaps are, and identify action plans to bridge the gap between the culture that they want to achieve as opposed to where they are today, your CHRO role will be effective in terms of carrying out a portion of that human capital strategy. And then finally, being a talent scout every day, everywhere, every time. So it's not the role of the executive search director, recruitment director to be just the recruiter, but it's your role as CHRO as well to constantly be in the lookout for talent. And sometimes the right talent is just there casually networking with you, not necessarily the person that's looking for a job, but perhaps key talent that you'd like to tap into maybe down the road or in the future. But always being on the lookout for key talent is essential in the role of a CHRO. And then finally, a decision advisor, I spoke about this earlier very briefly, but the role that's heavily required of CHROs is not necessarily to be good in math, but just to be able to understand, I think Michelle spoke about this morning, is be able to make sense out of data. Present trends, correlate trends, look at data, make sense out of the data that's being presented. Maybe I can give you an example here relative to what we do at Aon. So I mentioned earlier the rising cost of healthcare. And when we speak to clients today and share with them, for example, results around rising costs of your healthcare, for instance, we talk about claims utilization. We talk about the possibility of HMO premiums going up. But we also encourage and share data relevant to claims utilization. Where is it happening? When is it happening? What's the average cost of claims? What are the top claims that your employees are utilizing hospitals or clinics for? And be able to triangulate that data with your absenteeism data. Why are people being sick, claiming to be out sick, claiming to be absent? Why are they leaving the organization? What's your clinic data also saying? What are the dispensation of medicines telling you? So if you triangulate all these data, that's the role of the CHRO to present to the CEO or to your board. These are the reasons why we have high cost of healthcare within the organization and why it is very important to create employee well-being programs to help mitigate the cost. So those are some of the things that you can take to the table when having conversations. So it's not necessarily just trends and it stops there, but it's got to be data that makes sense and an action plan resulting from there. So, oops, sorry, I pressed too much. So in order to succeed in all those roles that I had spoken about earlier, we found that there are 5 capabilities that the CHRO needs to take on and to continue to build or continue to enhance. And the way we had written these 5 capabilities is around leading, not necessarily around managing. So the first is leading self. Interpersonal skills are very crucial. It's very, very important for a CHRO or any member of the CF, the HR team for that matter, to be able to build relationships and build rapport across different levels within the organization, inside the organization as well as outside the organization. Number 2, we believe that leading externally is just as critical. The relationship with vendors, with academe, for example, with the competition, is just as important as the relationship with anybody within the organization. Third, leading the function. So gone are the days when we need technical HR expertise. We're finding actually that more and more people are coming from different functions into the HR space without that scientific or technical HR knowledge. So at CHRO to succeed, they need to strongly build the capability around leading the function, not necessarily managing the function. And to us, that means revisiting HR priorities, revisiting HR strategies, and making sure that HR strategies or your human capital strategies are anchored on your overall business strategy. Fourth, leading across. So building relationships, I mentioned earlier, but it's equally important to build relationships with your peers, with the C-suite. So whether that be CFOs, COOs, anybody that belongs to the C-suite category or senior leadership category, it's very important to build relationships, not just as fellow colleagues, but perhaps even as confidants, even as professional coaches for each other or mentors. It's very important to build that trust, the credibility, and the confidence with each other. And finally, leading up. So I mentioned earlier, leading up is so important, the presence in the board meeting. I'll give you an example earlier. In my career, when I used to work for the BPO space, our global president would come to the Philippines about twice a year. And this was about 10 years ago maybe, when attrition in the BPO space was extremely high. And I remember he came to me and said, Cris, I didn't know attrition was so high. We're spending X amount of dollars, losing people left and right, and what is HR doing about it? So number one, I was caught off guard. I didn't know attrition was part of the board agenda. Number two, obviously the materials that were presented to him were not my materials, there was someone else's. And number three, it's embarrassing, right? More than anything else. So that was a hard lesson. We all have difficult lessons, but we learn from them. And from then on, I said, anytime there's a people agenda in the board meeting, I have to be there. So I'm not a member of the board, but I do come in every once in a while to present. So that's my best advice. I think sometimes board members are a mix of internal and external parties to the organization, but at any time there's an HR or people-related agenda, it's very important for the CHRO to be able to present. It's very important for you to have a presence, to be able to present what the story is and what your game plan is. So some key takeaways, because I was only given 20 minutes to present, so there's a lot more data in the studies and a lot more fact-based evidence from the interviews with the CEOs and CHROs, and we're very happy to share them with you perhaps separately. Happy to present to companies that might be interested. But some takeaways before I wrap up. So number one, take a hard look at yourself and the organization you belong to. Take a look at the C-suite and the kinds of either complements or opposing forces that there might be, and ensure you're fit within the organization. Second, to build a relationship by providing coaching services to your peers. You can start there, and that helps build the credibility and build the confidence and trust in you as a CHRO. Third, revisit your HR strategies and priorities and be able to look at it from a human capital strategy perspective anchored on your overall business strategy, and you need to ensure that there's an alignment between the two of them. And fourth, we strongly believe maintaining a good network, again, inside, outside the organization is very important to remain and keep abreast of what's going on in the industry and even outside the industry. I spoke about board experience earlier. It's very important, not just for agenda purposes, but for your own development as well. And finally, self-awareness is always key. Eric spoke about this earlier too when he spoke about looking at yourself not just from a wellness standpoint, but be able to consider some opportunity areas that you need to develop further and be honest and humble enough to ask for help from peers or people outside, the likes of Richard perhaps or anybody else, who would gladly give advice and mentorship. So finally, as we think big, be big, HR, I leave you with a quote that is such a cliche, but so important. With great power comes great responsibility. So cheers to CHROs. Thank you very much.